Hi, my name is JJ Kozak. I've been in the mole trapping business since 1994, and over the years I've seen a lot of different types of mole problems, and I've learned how to deal with each one of them effectively. In this video, we're going to use that experience to ensure that these are the last dollars you spend dealing with your mole problem. So with that, let's get started on the basics of mole trapping. There are 5 key ingredients to trapping moles successfully. Number 1, finding the best place to set. Number 2, opening the tunnel correctly. Number 3, preparing the trap properly. Number 4, setting the trap in just the right way. Number 5, covering the trap carefully. So let's talk about each of these components. Step number 1, finding the best place to set. The most logical place to go is the biggest pile, right? Wrong. Big piles are usually intersections of 2 separate tunnels and cause the mole to act unpredictably. Instead, we must first distinguish between the 2 types of tunnels, feeding and traveling tunnels, and that will help us locate a good spot for a trap. Feeding tunnels are usually in the middle of the lawn or garden. They do not follow a straight line, and they're shallow. Do you see how the tunnels are visible from the surface? Tunnels are not following a straight line. These kinds are typically in loose soil, as in sand or gardens. The tunnels again here are not in a straight line. They're deeper, but they are still feeding tunnels, and they're not straight. We do not want to set traps on these types of tunnels. The mole may return to these routes, but it's not a sure bet, unlike a traveling tunnel. Traveling tunnels may be less visible, but are not too difficult to find. These tunnels typically run alongside structures like fences, foundations, and driveways, and are 2 to 3 inches deep. These are the types of tunnels we want to use. The common key among all traveling tunnels is that they follow a straight line. The ideal situation is when you see a series of hills or an upraised tunnel along a structure, such as a foundation or driveway. The next best situation is a series of fresh mole hills or soil eruptions that appear in a straight line, even though they are not along a structure. If no traveling tunnels are apparent from the surface, you will need to look a little harder. The first step is to probe the dirt beside all structures that are close to mole activity. You are looking for a spot where your finger breaks through into an underground tunnel. If you have deep tunnels or hard soil, you may wish to use a metal probe to help in locating a traveling tunnel. An ideal traveling tunnel will be around 3 to 5 inches deep. If you are not able to locate a traveling tunnel, simply stamp down all activity in the lawn and wait for new tunnels to reappear. Look for mole hills that were previously stamped down and have since reappeared. If all else fails, simply go to the freshest mole hills or tunnels, wherever they may be. Now that we've learned how to find the best place to set, let's talk about opening the tunnel correctly. Opening the tunnel. Clear the dirt away. Find the exit point. Probe the exit point to determine which way the tunnel is heading. You are looking for a tunnel with only 2 entrances opposite to each other. If you find only 1 or 3 entrances, don't set the trap here. Once you have found a good location, open the tunnel by removing the top of it with a hand spade or similar device. You can even do this with your hand in soft soil. Be careful not to disturb the soil more than you need to. A correctly opened tunnel should be in a U shape, so each side of the tunnel forms a barrier to prevent the mole from digging around the trap. If the side walls of the tunnel have been disturbed, it is critical that you rebuild them to recreate the U shape. Moles take the path of least resistance through a tunnel, so take a few minutes to pack the sides and bottom of the tunnel firmly. This will ensure the mole enters the trap and hits the trigger correctly. After the tunnel has been opened, and we know that we have found a tunnel with only 2 entrances, we must clear the dirt properly. Use your index finger and thumb to pinch the dirt. This will enable you to scoop the dirt without pushing it back into the tunnels. To further ensure it will be clear, use your index and middle finger to sweep away the excess dirt out of the tunnel. Before we set the trap, let's be sure we understand how it will work. Moles are very meticulous about keeping their tunnels clean. They typically use them 2 to 3 times every few hours. The trigger on the trap will serve as an obstruction, and the mole will attempt to push it out of the way. When it does, the jaws will close on the mole like so.
And just like that, we've solved our mole problem. Let's focus on the preparation of the trap itself and go through a checklist that will ensure the trap will function properly when we place it into the tunnel. The first thing we need to check is that the jaws on the trap are free to function. As you can see here, they cross over. We do not want this because the trap will not close properly when we put it into the tunnel. As you can see now, they are free to function. This is what we want to see. Number 2, we need to check that the spring is functioning freely. This is very easy to check, and if it is not, all you need to do is put a light lubricant on it to ensure it will close. Once we are sure the trap will function correctly, we are now able to set it. A word of warning though, and I cannot stress this enough. Always ensure that one hand is on the trap and one hand is on the trigger. A trap springing freely onto a finger can cause serious injury, so be very careful. Before setting the trigger, it is a good idea to tie it to the trap with a string. This will ensure the trigger does not go missing. Be careful, however, not to use plastic ties, steel rods, or anything that will prevent the trap from closing properly. Setting the trigger. The MolePro comes with a universal trigger, which makes it an effective trap for moles of all sizes. The trigger can be flipped to create narrower or wider jaws. This is very important since the trap jaws need to rest snugly against the walls of the tunnel. Choose whichever setting makes the jaw open to the same width of the tunnel. If neither size fits perfectly, the jaws can be bent outward or inward slightly. Clamp arms together with one hand and take the trigger in the other. Place the trigger on the 2 notches. Ensure it is an equal distance from each set of jaws. The universal trigger can be set to a sensitive or stiff tension. We recommend it be set as sensitively as possible for best results. With the arms clamped firmly, start rocking the trigger back and forth until you know exactly when it will spring. Always ensure your other hand is firmly holding the 2 handles of the trap together so it will not activate while adjusting the trigger. Set it so that it is as close to the springing point as possible without actually setting off the trap. As a rule of thumb, you want to ensure the trigger will go off by pushing it lightly with a stick. Making the trigger sensitive will take some practice and patience, but this is an extremely important part, so take your time. When the trigger is set to its most sensitive point, you are ready to place it into the tunnel. Gently insert it into the opening you have created. Work the trap in until it fits snugly, being careful that the jaws are free to close. Now we're ready to cover the trap.
Cover the trap with the loosest, most dry soil you can possibly get. You may find the appropriate soil at the base of a large tree trunk among the roots, around a covered part of a house foundation, or in a child's sandbox. Sand is actually the perfect filler. The reason we do not want clumpy, wet soil is that using this type could cause the trap to jam or close improperly. After you have found enough good soil to cover the traps, we need to ensure that there are no rocks in the soil. We must now sift the dirt. You can rub it through your hands, you can use a spaghetti strainer, or you could use a regular sifter. As a rule, we do not want any rocks or sticks that are larger than a jelly bean. After the dirt has been sifted, scoop up a double handful and gently pour it into the tunnel opening. The trap should be covered up to the top part of the spring. Pat the dirt gently around the handles. The trap is now set and ready to go.
When you are setting your new traps, the most important point to remember is that moles are lazy and will choose the easiest possible path when going through a tunnel. If your trap is not set properly, the moles will find it easier to dig around it rather than go directly to the trigger. By making certain that the side walls of the tunnel form a U-shape, and the trap fits snugly between the 2 side walls of the tunnel, and that the trigger is set sensitively, you will greatly increase the effectiveness of your new traps. These 3 components are the main secrets of professional mole trappers in a nutshell, so make absolutely certain you are doing each one of these correctly.
Here's an example of a property with activity everywhere. We can dismiss the piles in the middle of the grass and instead focus on the most likely areas found along the structures. Here is where you want to set the trap. You are now prepared to trap your own moles. Like any multi-step procedure, it may take a couple of attempts before you are successful. But keep trying using the steps that we have just covered and you will get the results you're looking for. Having said that, there are some situations in which mole problems can be complicated somewhat. Such complications may be the result of unpredictable mole behavior or complications from soil patterns.
Common soil complications include rocky soil, where rocks jam up the trap. Solutions would be to use a shop-style vacuum to clear out the tunnel, or probe the tunnel more deeply with your fingers using the 2-finger back brush and reset using soil that has been thoroughly sifted. Dry, sandy, or loose soil allows the mole to dig around the trap and avoid being caught. Solutions are water the surrounding area for 1 or 2 days before setting the trap. Pack the walls of the tunnel so it becomes more narrow, ensuring they are packed as firmly as possible. Ensure the trigger is set to its most sensitive point. Another option is to set the traps back to back so you can reduce the chances of moles digging around a single trap.
Very wet or clay-based soil prevents the trap from closing freely. Solution: rebuild the tunnel using the instructions in step 2. Cover with dry or sandy dirt. Using sand to cover the trap is an excellent alternative in overly wet conditions. Then place the bucket over the trap to prevent exposure to rain. Here are some common questions I frequently hear from people with unexpected or unusual mole activity.
The mole has not gone near my trap since I set them. What should I do?
Don't assume that since you see no activity on the surface that the mole has not been active in that location. Sometimes a mole may dig around the trap and not leave any evidence on the surface. If it appears that your trap has not been disturbed within 3 or 4 days, gently pull the trap out of the soil. Using your finger, probe the area where you had the trap to determine if the mole has dug around the trap. If there is a fresh tunnel, proceed to the next troubleshooting tip. If it appears that there has not been a tunnel created, remove the trap and place it in an area with fresh activity. The mole is digging around my traps and is not setting them off. What am I doing wrong? Make sure the trigger is the path of least resistance through the tunnel, as we discussed previously. Those 3 key steps again are: ensure the exposed tunnel is in a U-shape. Ensure the trap sits snugly between the 2 tunnels. Ensure the trigger is as loose as possible. If this fails to work for you, lay a sheet of tin foil over the jaws. This step will ensure that no dirt enters the trap. Be careful to ensure the handles are free to operate and the jaws are free to close. Then place a light layer of dirt over the tin foil to prevent any light from entering the tunnel. The mole is springing the traps without getting caught. Why is this happening? If you are certain that the jaws are as wide as the tunnel, the most likely reason for this problem is that the trigger is being set too sensitive, since the trap is going off too quickly. As I mentioned, the universal trigger can be set at different tensions. Insert the trigger into the trap, but do not rock it back and forth, as we previously showed. By seating the trigger firmly between the jaws, the mole will have to push harder on the trigger to activate the trap. Remember, this should only be done if the trap is being sprung, but the mole has not yet been caught. I have followed the instructions for locating traveling tunnels, but still cannot find one. Stamp all the activity in the area down. Don't simply rake it over. The mole will rebuild its tunnels and it will create fresh activity. Then set the traps on the areas with the fresh activity. There are so many molehills, I wouldn't even know where to start. Rake over the hills and determine where the activity is current. Concentrate on only one area at a time. Most mole problems are the work of only 1 or 2 moles, so catching only one mole will greatly reduce the intensity of the activity. Once that has been dealt with, move on to the next area. The mole's traveling tunnels are all under the sidewalk or a fence and are not accessible from the top down. What should I do? Well, follow the entire tunnel to search for even a small portion which is accessible from the top. If you have no success, you will need to use the sideways insertion technique. First, clear the tunnel, exposing it from the side of the structure. Then, insert the trap sideways. Now, cover the trap, pressing the dirt lightly into the jaws. For questions or comments on this video, please visit our website at www.molepro.com